Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Bowman, Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Brain, and I want to welcome you to this special presentation on Plans Are Nothing, Planning is Everything. Are you prepared to compete in any environment? Presented by Oliver White. One quick note, there will be an audience question and answer session at the end of this presentation. Audience members are encouraged to submit their questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So the COVID years showed us that the worldwide supply chain was unprepared for significant disruption, and recovery was just as challenging. Before the pandemic, many companies were already struggling to manage their supply chains. COVID exposed their weaknesses and revealed how unprepared they were to deal with the brute force that replaced best practice planning and execution capability as the primary supply process. Now, businesses are realizing that proper planning and preparation are essential to competing in any environment. So today, we're going to focus on the top 5 key drivers of readiness for competing in an ever-changing supply chain environment. With that, I want to introduce our speakers for today. Pete Alley is a business advisor with Oliver White Americas. Pete has extensive experience as a supply chain leader, building corporate planning and execution capability with a focus on integrated business planning, or IBP. Prior to joining Oliver White, Pete led a number of business transformation improvement initiatives, including the global implementation of IBP for a multinational CPG business. He also led improvements in demand planning, long-term supply and capacity planning, manufacturing, and distribution operations. Tom Stroll is a business advisor with Oliver White Americas. Tom is a consultant, coach, and educator, providing companies with guidance in operations planning and control and IBP. In a career spanning more than 30 years working in industry, Tom has specialized in operations planning and control principles and been involved in multiple business turnarounds. He uses proven path tools and concepts to help companies formalize systems for demand, supply, and inventory planning. With that, I want to turn it over to Pete Alley. Pete, take it away.
Thanks, Bob, and thank you for joining us today, everyone. And as we get into the presentation today, during the introduction that Bob had made, he mentioned the pandemic. And as Tom and I were preparing for this presentation, we were thinking about, we hear this word unprecedented all the time, unprecedented over the last 3 years. But the reality is, whether it was port strikes or transportation disruptions or fuel availability issues or labor availability issues, we've all experienced over our careers disruptions to the supply network, and they are going to continue, and we have to be prepared for them. So as we thought about what we would take you through today, we thought about focusing on those things that are foundational, those things that are absolutely essential to successfully navigating a world where it becomes more and more challenging to compete, it becomes more and more challenging to execute. So we're going to start off by having Tom take you through this intriguing topic called the spider web of product supply. But then we're also going to explain to you the quote that we put on the presentation today: plans are nothing, planning is everything. And then we will go into the foundational elements of what makes it possible for us to respond in a changing environment, changing world. Tom and I have background in industry. We actually have done what we are describing today. We've experienced it firsthand, and we will weave some of our operational background and some of our experiences into the conversation today. And we want to make it a conversation. So as we get through the topics that are listed at the left here, we want to make sure that we leave enough time for a discussion time, Q&A time, give you the opportunity to ask some questions. The time will go by very quickly, and we want to make sure that there's some time for us to interact, and we certainly appreciated that. Tom, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Pete. Appreciate that. Listen, I wanted to take people through a perception that I have about the supply chain. When I look at the supply chain throughout my years in industry, it started to feel like, hey, it's all connected together. It's all tied. And I also observed if something breaks, if there's a problem in one spot on the web, it vibrates and you can feel it in the other areas on the spider web. So for instance, if the forecast is biased in any way, you're going to feel that in things like production planning. You're going to feel it in supplier scheduling. You're going to feel it in distribution requirements. You're going to definitely feel it in inventory. If you're out of inventory, you're going to feel it in other areas. Regulatory implications come along, and that shakes the spider web. And so, bottom line to all this is, nobody really cares, right? You've got these things that you need to work. You've got this spider web of activity that's going on, and yep, somebody touches it, it vibrates in another area. But bottom line is, results do not equal no results plus a good excuse, right? And so what it means is we need more control over what we're doing, not less. More discipline, more decision making, more information, more formality, and more accurate and transparent data.
So we put as the title of our presentation today a quote from General Dwight Eisenhower: "Plans are nothing, planning is everything." And sometimes it's easy for us to misquote that and think about, well, planning is hard and planning is nothing. But what Eisenhower was saying here, there's a lot of wisdom in, because what he was saying was plans will have to change very, very frequently and very often. And therefore, we need to have the discipline of being able to plan on a regular basis and then replan because situations change. And what we like to think about this is in terms of agility. Having planning capability gives us the ability to have planned agility. And planned agility is very different than forced agility. Not too long ago, I was having a conversation with a chief operating officer of a consumer electronics company, and he said, "You know, Pete, it feels like every day we're doing these heroic diving catches to save the day, to save the week, to save the quarter, and it just feels like it's draining to the organization. It just doesn't feel like it's sustainable." And that's what forced agility is like. And I remember in my operations days, one of the things that I did was gave out awards and crystals and plaques for those people that would do those heroic things to get that shipment out the door, to rescue the quarter. But what we're really advocating for here is to have a ability to do planning on a regular basis. And the elements that we're going to get into are the things that enable us to have that planning capability and exercise that muscle group on a regular basis so that it becomes stronger and more agile, so that our responses are planned agility. The title of this page here, Table Stakes. We think there's some very foundational elements that some companies are either not wanting to tackle or perhaps it's too difficult to tackle. And this term table stakes refers to the cost of entry, the cost of sitting at the table, the very basic minimums. And master data is one of those table stakes. And there are different components of master data. You will have definitions of what those components of master data look like on the left side of the page here. And for sure, some of those things are very obvious, like having a bill of materials. Everybody will be able to talk about that. But then having the appropriate planning parameters built into all of your tools, however you're planning, having accurate routings and work centers, and then also having your logistics master set up correctly so that you're representing transit times and vehicle capacities and all that wonderful logistics master type of information. We need to have that all correct so that we can enable the things that you see on the right-hand side of the page here. So think about a foundation of a home. If you're putting up a home or if you're renovating a home, you want to know that that foundation is in good condition so that what you're building upon it is going to last. If you don't check out the foundation first, you're going to put together a house that's going to be built on something that's not stable. So if you want to have a disciplined approach to planning, you definitely need to have your master data as an enabler. You need to have that solid, you need to have that accurate, you need to have that managed and understood. Likewise, if we think about things like end-to-end supply chain visibility, master data is an enabler for that, as well as the thing that we mentioned on the previous page, which is agile planning. So every step of the way, we want to make sure that we have valid plans. And valid plans are really bedrock and foundational to everything that a company does. It also, we found, is that master data becomes a very, very important enabler to having the right size of inventory. We have, over the last several years, moved from a situation where we will sell everything we make to now we're in a situation where demand is tapering off in many industries, not all. There's some industries where they have a backlog that runs out through 2029, but in many industries, and Tom and I spent quite a bit of our time in consumer goods, we're seeing a softening demand. And so we need to have the capability to flexibly respond to those changing situations, changing demand picture, so that we have the right size of inventory at the right place at the right time. Master data is an enabler of that as well. Next page, Tom, please. So as you know, maybe you will know by the end of the session today, we do a series of public education classes. And at some of our recent education sessions, we asked the question of the participants, and you'll see the summary visually depicted on the left. How are we doing in terms of our master data accuracy? And it was interesting that in this particular group, nobody responded that their master data was 90 to 100% accurate. You see the stacked bars there that illustrate that there's a fair percentage that thought that their accuracy was less than 60% or 70%, and then somewhere in between. Now, am I advocating that this is a statistically accurate sample? No. But what I think it is, a symptomatic indicator that people that we interact with, people that are coming to our public classes, recognize that master data is an area of opportunity. So when you attend a session like this, what I think I'm always looking for is what can I take home with me? So throughout this presentation, Tom and I are going to sprinkle in some things that perhaps you can take home, take to your work, and put some of these steps into action. So if we have an issue with master data, there's several steps that we see that are proven over a period of time to get better. First, scrub your data. Get it to a baseline accuracy, establish governance, and establish an audit process so that you can identify where there are issues and take corrective actions. And part of that governance that we mentioned here also means establishing what master data elements are owned by who, and what is the check and balance to make sure that that takes place the way it's designed to do. And of course, it requires documentation. Now, documentation doesn't sound like a lot of fun, but it's really critical. Because if we don't have a process documented, if we don't have our master data governance documented, how are we going to know what happens when there's a handoff to the next person that takes that job? So at the bottom here, Tom and I are urging you to say, don't guess that we're okay. Know for sure, because this is so foundational and so important. Next, please, Tom. Inventory. Inventory is also one of those foundational elements that we really need to have an understanding of. On the depiction on the left here, you see that you have this gray area that's labeled as unknown. You may wonder, what are these guys talking about? How could you have inventory that's unknown? But the reality is that in many companies, if you ask the question about inventory, the answer that we get back is, well, we have this inventory, but I'm just not sure what all the components are. And increasingly, what we find is that people tend to not have a solid grounding on what the definitions of the components of inventory are. There's components of inventory that are driven by safety stock, cycle stock, hedging stock, the terms that you see on this page here, and also pre-stock or pipeline fill. But what we find over the last several years is more and more people are using safety stock incorrectly and using that as a catch-all saying, take safety stock down. And that edict might come from somebody in a very high position of authority. So we believe that education and understanding what the components of inventory are becomes really, really critical. And not too long ago, I was working with a client company, and I asked in the supplier review, who owns inventory here? And there was an awkward moment of silence, and nobody would raise their hand. And the reality is that inventory is a result of decisions made by many people in the company. And we list some on the right-hand side of the page here just as a thought starter. But on product design, how you design your products. Are they made of components that are common across different product groups? And what's your supply strategy? Do you have some nearshoring of some of your suppliers so that you can have customization that's closer to shore as opposed to having all your customization overseas or some distant supply point? That's a supply strategy. And all that has a very strong bearing in terms of what your inventory profile will look like. One more that I'll call out here, life cycle, product life cycle management. Product life cycle becomes a really important thing for you to understand. Many companies have a very, very strong discipline around having a product life cycle management. They have a stage of a product's life where they're growing and introducing the product, then there's a period of stability, then there's a period of ramp down and then exit. That discipline of making sure that you're managing your product life cycle becomes really important to understanding what are the components of inventory and how that's going to change depending on what your product life cycle decisions are. All inventory is not created equal, and one of the things that we want to make sure that we understand as we go through our analysis of inventory, what are the components of inventory and how did it come to be? What were the things that created that inventory that we have currently? And digging into that segment of inventory that we don't really understand, what is it that that we need to know about that? Identifying what the transactional movements are and the transactional processes are, documenting those so we understand how inventory is being accounted for every step of the way. That becomes a discipline that again is enabled by master data. And we want to also have a regular audit process so that we're cycle counting, ensuring our inventory record accuracy. This is a discipline that's well known by many of you, I'm sure, and practiced by many of you, and you have very high levels of accuracy. Congratulations. Do you do the same as you do on your finished goods as you do on your raw materials? Do you also check your suppliers' inventory and making sure that they're doing cycle counting so we don't get caught in a situation where we don't have accurate inventory and because of that we can't service our customers? So I hope you see how this is starting to tie together. Master data becomes an enabler to do good, solid management and planning processes, but also having a solid understanding of what creates inventory and what the root causes are becomes a real key competitive advantage as you think about going forward. You want to be able to compete. Your company wants to be able to compete. And in order to do that, you need to have solid master data and a solid understanding of where your inventory is coming from. Tom, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Pete. So I'm going to just briefly hit on this. There's an important principle in play here. If you think about the elements of supply planning, you want to start with the end in mind. And what do I mean by that? Well, what I'm talking about is over there on the right, you have a box called customer service. Before we can understand what we need to do in the supply organization, what we need to manage from the spider web and how we want to manage that, we need to understand what the objective is. What is the objective for customer service? What does on time in full look like? And only after you understand what the on time in full looks like, can you then move over to the left-hand side of the screen and start exercising understanding around what are your supply strategies going to be to meet that customer service need. So just as an example, if I had a product or a customer that said, look, I want your product, but I need it delivered within 48 hours and it needs to be ship complete every time. Well, there's a supply strategy that's going to have to tie to that. Most likely, you're going to have that as a stock item and you'll pull it from inventory and you'll ship it. Okay. Lead time plays an important role. Component availability plays an important role in all this. All these are elements of supply strategy. Capacity plays a role in this. So there's a number of different elements tied to supply strategy that are all pulling together to understand what you're going to do to meet your customer service needs. Now, demand, obviously, this is a demand-driven process, and so demand has a role in trying to tell us what they think that demand profile is going to be. Now, there's an interesting principle about demand, and that is that there is no forecast that's ever or always correct. Sometimes, maybe, but it's not always correct. And kind of by definition, forecasts are wrong. Demand plans are wrong. It's up to the supply organization to put in place, again, those supply strategies around the two levers that we have available to us, and those are capacity and inventory, to put those together in such a way that we're offsetting the variability associated with demand and still meeting customer needs. The product supply team is responsible to respond to that demand plan with an answer of yes. Now, the reality of the situation is, across that spider web, we do not have unconstrained supply chains. All supply chains on planet Earth are constrained. We need to figure out how to work through those constraints, understand the constraints, and when we see constraints develop, we would respond to the demand plan by saying yes, or sometimes it's yes if, or yes but, meaning yes, we can do it, but it may not be exactly the quantity you're looking for in the time frame you're looking at it. Yes, we can do it if we invest in additional capacity. Maybe we need to add another fill line, or we need to add another shift. So yes, we can do it. Yes, but, or yes, if. Now, the yes, buts and yes, ifs form the foundation of alternative scenarios. And that's where the supply chain owes it to the business to say, if I can't give you a blanket yes, here's my alternative, and this is what it looks like. And this is what I can promise. This is what you can go back to your customer with. In the end, when it comes to inventory, inventory is not an independent variable. Pete just talked about that a minute ago, right? He said, inventory is an outcome. It is a result of business decisions. It's a result of planning. It's a result of execution. And it doesn't just magically appear or disappear. It's there for a reason. It's there to buffer against variability. That's why we have inventory. Okay? All of this is designed to support the needs of our customers. So supply strategy, I've talked about this a little bit already, but if you think about supply strategy, what this chart is talking about is, well, where are we going to meet the customer with inventory? If the customer has a demand that says we need it in 48 hours or 24 hours, or if we're working at McDonald's and the requirement is you have my hamburger in 30 seconds, well, then we're going to have that in stock. So on the right-hand side, you can see that depicts a make-to-stock environment. We're holding inventory. Lead time is very short, but inventory is typically very high. As you move to the left, well, things start to change a little bit. If you start moving into assemble to order, well, now you're not holding finished good stock. You might be holding some sub-assemblies that you'll pull from inventory and assemble at the last minute to meet the needs of the customer. Well, that's good, but there's a little bit extra lead time with that. Continue moving to the left, make to order. Well, you're not holding any sub-assemblies, you're just assembling components from inventory to make the product that's in demand. Again, longer lead time, less inventory. You're not really holding any inventory now, finished goods. You're holding it all in component level. Purchase to order and design or engineer to order are also very different. From make to order to the right, that's all forecasted. Purchase to order and design to order is generally not forecasted. And so you're going to be holding inventory capacity in different locations. For purchase to order, you're probably going to be holding it in your purchasing team. They have to respond quickly when a customer places an order to get the materials in as quickly as possible, as shortest lead time possible. In a design or engineer to order situation, you're going to be holding capacity with designers and engineers, right? But your lead time is going to be very long. The analogy that I like to use is, I love motorcycles. I loved riding motorcycles, and I've ridden all kinds. But if I want a Harley Davidson, I can go to the showroom, Harley Davidson showroom, and I can buy one today if I wanted to. But if I want a one-off custom that's got to be designed and engineered to my specific requirements, well, that's not an inventory, but it has very long lead time. But I'll get exactly what I want. So that's kind of the supply strategy and where to meet the customer with inventory and capacity. So Pete took you through the master data requirements and inventory requirements, accuracy requirements, those sorts of things. Why are those important? Well, because the planning process should be a disciplined process. It all starts with the demand input. You can see that on the upper right. And it flows through down into what we call the planning spine. Kind of starts with distribution requirements. If you've got multiple distribution centers, you need to understand what your replenishment requirements are. That then feeds down into the master schedule as the requirements to drive the master schedule. The output of the master schedule is a material requirements plan and a capacity plan. And all of your lower level requirements around logistics planning, manufacturing scheduling, supplier scheduling, all of these things, again, back to the spider web, you can see they're all connected. So how do we bring this all together so that it can make sense for senior leaders? Well, what we were just talking about up until now, what both Pete and I have been talking about, is kind of that detail preparation and execution and planning process at the detail level, the execution layer in the business. But the senior leaders can't really make sense out of SKU level daily demand kind of stuff to understand where their business is going. So once a month, we would say, you take a snapshot of what's going on and you roll it up and you look at it. And we would say it's a 5-step process. It starts with understanding what is the portfolio of products that you have to sell. What are the new products coming in, the old products going out? That defines the basket of goods that you have. And there's a formal handoff of that to the demand organization. The demand organization now knows these are the products we have to sell. Again, these are the new ones coming in and the old ones going out. Now it's up to them to create a time phase plan looking forward, minimally 24 months in monthly buckets, volume, revenue, gross margin, all of that racked up so that now you can see this is what the demand plan looks like and this is what it means financially. That demand plan gets handed to the supply organization as a request for product. That understanding that it's a request for product is absolutely crucial. I'm sure some of you maybe all of you have been in situations where demand didn't really take ownership of their demand signal and they just kind of threw it over the fence. Best practice would say, no, we're not going to just throw it over the fence. What we're saying to the supply organization is, we're going to sell this. I need you to make it. And so now the supply organization has its marching orders, and it's their job to say yes, or yes if, or yes but, back to the demand to say yes, we can do it. And then it's up to them to create their time-phased supply plan, looking forward, same time horizon, say yes, this is what we can do. All of this gets racked up once a month financially. And then we take so as this was coming up vertically through portfolio, demand, and supply, each one of those business processes are looking at their own to see if we've got any gaps, performance gaps or such. And now when it goes to integrated reconciliation, we're going to look horizontally, right? We're going to look across the three to see if we've got any gaps developing, say, between demand and portfolio, or demand and supply, or even maybe supply and portfolio. Once these gaps are understood, we're going to want to understand what is the corrective action. It's not enough just to identify that we have a problem. We have to have a solution to close that gap. Ultimately, when we get this 24-month forward-looking plan, we want to be able to gap against our annual business plan and our strat plans, 2 to 3 year strat plans. That gives senior leadership now all the information they need to understand, is their business going in the right direction or not? Are we on plan or off plan? And if we're off plan, what are we going to do about it? There are critical Class A behaviors that underpin all of this. And these may seem kind of childish in some cases, maybe, like things like do what you say you're going to do. You would be surprised how often people say that they're going to do something and then never do it. Or maybe you wouldn't be surprised. Do not promise more than you can deliver. Don't put 10 pounds in a 5-pound sack. You only have so much capacity. There's a certain physics involved to the equation, right? No matter what you say, you're only going to get what your capacity allows you to get. So you might as well plan it rather than over planning and under delivering. Be open and honest. Tell the truth. Bad news does not get better with time. It gets worse every time. It is not wine. It is not cheese. It doesn't get better with time. The sooner leadership knows they have a problem, the sooner they can get on it. Last one I'll comment on here is no shooting the messenger. That's an important concept, right? If we want the truth, leadership has to be willing to hear the truth, and people have to be willing to tell the truth. The quickest way to stop all that from happening is you shoot the messenger one time. And what do I mean by that? They bring bad news, and immediately it erupts into an emotional outburst. You've just shot the messenger, and now you won't get the truth anymore. So just to wrap, sorry, Pete, were you going to do wrap up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as we are wrapping up, what Tom and I wanted to do is provide you a brief summary of the topics that we've covered, and also some suggested things for you to consider for action. You've invested some time, considerable time out of your busy day to participate in this webinar, and for sure, we'd like you to take some take-homes with you, some things that you can check out to see if you have areas of opportunity that you can pursue. And at the beginning of the presentation, we talked about this concept of agile planning, and the opposite of that is forced agility, which is that diving catch, using a lot of energy and time and heroics to save the day, to save the week, to save the quarter. So we talked about how there's some foundational elements that we believe are essential to success. One of those is master data. If you don't know where your master data accuracy stands, do some digging, do some checking, establish an audit, and if you don't have a governance process in place, set one up. Make sure that you document what are the processes, who owns which data elements. And if you don't know the answers to these things, then it's an action item for you coming out of this session. Similarly, on inventory, knowing to make up your inventory. If you have inventory, you can definitively say, this much is due to my cycle, this much is due to in transit, this much is due to pipeline fill, this much is due to all these different causes. Fantastic. But you also need to understand what components of inventory do you have that are slow moving or no moving. I can't tell you how many times Tom and I see an inventory chart that shows just total inventory for a product category. That's not telling the whole story. There's depth to the story. There's depth to the story. So you want to look at what is your slow moving or no moving inventory. Why? Ask the questions, establish a root cause. And not only that, but also make sure your inventory record accuracy is correct. Because if your inventory record accuracy is not where it needs to be, you're going to have all kinds of problems. In my days of responsibility for warehousing, one of the things I did was establish a monthly cycle of mock recalls. I worked in the food business, so one of the things we wanted to do was to exercise that muscle. If we need to do a product recall, can we do it? So we would do a monthly mock recall. And if we had inventory record accuracy issues on our finished goods side, we would find that out very quickly. You should be doing the same thing for finished goods and also the same thing for your raw and input materials. That's best practice. So there may be an opportunity there for you. Then there's the steps that you can plan to take and address, the steps that Tom took you through. What is my supply strategy? And one of the things that you might want to do is actually apply the test to say, the strategy answer the question, what am I going to go do? Let me give you an example of that. If my supply strategy is be low-cost producer, that's an aspiration. I want to have that strategy expressed in terms of what do I go do? So to be low-cost producer, I may need to change some of my sourcing. I may need to change some of my last-minute customization to a nearshore solution provider. I may need to invest in some other methods of distribution and logistics or manufacturing. And then where to meet the customer. What is the model that you're going to follow? Are you going to be a make to stock? Are you going to be make to order or engineer to order? And in a company that's fairly significant size, you may have different models, but have those decisions been definitively made and are they documented? In terms of where inventory is growing, there may be decisions that need to be made to convert some of our items or some of our customers from a make to stock to a make to order. Those might be decisions that need to be debated and discussed and decided, and then document. All this needs to be documented. And then finally, what Tom presented is making sure that our short-term execution and our short-term planning processes tie together with that executive level integrated business planning approach that looks at sizing the business and where is our business going long-term. So this concludes our presentation for today. And we have left some time here for questions and answers, and we'd be happy to welcome those. Bob, do we have any questions? Or
we certainly do, Pete. We certainly
right.
do. And thank you so much for you both, Pete and Tom, for that great presentation. And even as we are answering the audience questions that have already come in, audience members, please continue to submit your questions by clicking on that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many of those as we can, time permitting. So let's start with this one. It's a good one. This questioner says, and you made the point before that the plan and forecasts are wrong. We hear that all the time. But this person says, unless we stop saying that we don't believe demand plans are ever accurate or rarely are, we won't be able to hold the demand organization accountable for being best in class, and we'll have to continue to do heroics on the supply side to continue customer support. In your experience, what is the best way to start driving the change for best in class with the demand side? Let me start with Pete on that, and I want to hear what Tom has to say too.
Okay, I'm sure Tom will have more to say than I will, but The first thing is that absolutely we should not stop trying to improve our forecast accuracy, but also forecast bias. Bias is something that absolutely is destructive in so many different ways to any organization. And Tom has some strong words to say about bias, but I'll let him say them. But start measuring, and then also start doing some root cause analysis to say, what are the root causes for my bias? Is it that I'm perpetually overly optimistic or overly pessimistic, or is it because I have incentives that are driving that behavior? But having the opportunity to meet as a group and just do some root cause assessment, many of the listeners and many of the participants will be familiar with a fishbone type of a exercise. You can substitute some of the elements of the fishbone to understand what the root causes are, but certainly measuring it and having a series of actions to improve upon it is really very, very important. I would never advocate for just giving up and say, oh, it's never going to be right. We need to have it better and better. Tom.
Yeah. So I do have a couple of strong comments on this, as you might imagine. So first of all, there is a difference between forecast accuracy and forecast bias. When Pete was talking about forecast bias, meaning that we're consistently over planning or under planning demand. We're over forecasting or under forecasting on a consistent basis, month after month. If that in fact is happening, the supply organization has no hope of meeting the requirements of their customers. It is a catastrophic situation that happens in companies that doesn't really get the attention it deserves. Normal variation, meaning that, maybe 1 month it's a little high, next month it's low, or maybe you get a couple of months in a row that it's low, but then it goes back. That kind of thing is something that the supply chain should be prepared to deal with, because they have buffers, they have flex capacity, and they have inventory. And those buffers offer protection against that variability. Now, the supply organization needs to understand that variability, and they need to bake that variability into their stock equation. But I don't generally get too worked up about forecast accuracy. What I really get worked up about is forecast bias. Now, on the accuracy piece, if you want to do something about accuracy, so let's, for example, we're not biased, but we have bad accuracy. So 1 month it's 50% too high, and the next month it's 30% too low, and it's big swings. Well, what that can cause is high variability would mean that you would need to hold more stock, and you would need to hold more flex capacity. Well, there's cost to that. There's big cost to that. There's cash implications on inventory, and there's cost implications on flex capacity. And so it's up to the supply chain to understand what are those cost implications and feed that back into the business. So that would drive the business to say, hey, we've got to do something to improve our forecast accuracy.
Thank you
So
for that. Yeah, strong words. I feel a little guilty now, because we as journalists are fond of going around just saying the forecast is always wrong. The forecast is always wrong. And I hate to give aid and comfort to demand planning organizations feeling that they don't have to come up with a decent forecast because of that. But
no,
anyway,
they do.
Okay. Here's another good one. I'm seeing a challenge in the business to determine when a SKU should be make to order or make to stock. Any hints or tips on what the turning point could be?
You want me to take that one?
Yeah. Why don't you give it a shot?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So you have an SKU that may have historically been make to stock, and maybe early in its life cycle it was, big time volume, and you were making a lot of it. It was a high runner, and you were just kind of rolling your inventory pretty consistently. But then over time, as it goes through its product life cycle, it starts to diminish. And suddenly Now you're getting orders maybe once every 4 months or once every 6 months. And if you want to keep that as a make to stock item, you got a couple of choices that you have to look at. One, if it's a batch product, you're going to be somewhat tied to your batch size. Unless you can reduce it, you're going to have problems. You'll end up probably obsoleting inventory over time. So that's number one. You need to make sure that your batch size is in line. If you can't really do anything about your batch size, and you really don't want to make this product and put it into stock because it's such a risk of obsoleting, that's when you need to have the discussion. Hey, we've got these products on the tail here, and they're not performing that well. We're investing a lot of time and resources into them. Here's a couple of choices. One, chop them out of the product line, chop the tail off, and take them out of the product line. Or you could move them to a make to order or even a purchase to order situation and just communicate to the customer, your lead time is going to be longer. We'll still get you the product, but we're not going to stock it anymore. We'll have to do it on a one-off basis or a make to order basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, communication is very important in that respect. All right, another question. When measuring forecast accuracy, should this be measured in the month of supply reaction? That is, for instance, if it takes 3 months for the supply response, should forecast accuracy be measured as M+3? What do you think?
Pete, you want to start on that one?
Sure, I'll start on that one. I think that the question has answered their own question in effect, because it depends on what you want to measure. But certainly, if I have a supply response that takes 3 months, then I want to measure what my accuracy and also what my bias is at that 3-month interval. That's for the supply response reason. There may be other reasons to measure at a different lag. For example, you might want to measure at a 1-month lag to actually see how well is my sales force actually calling customer demand, and how in tune with my customer base am I. So I think there's, depending on what the outcome is that we're seeking and what behavior we're seeking to address, that also plays into the answer. And one of the things that when Tom was talking about bias that came to mind is where you have extremes of bias. We've both seen this, is where bias is persistently high or persistently low. Oftentimes the supply organization will take it into their own hands to decide, what do I make? Because they see inventory building up. And that's a really bad outcome, no matter how you slice it, because now you've basically abdicated control of what your company's future is to the people that are deciding what to produce. And that may result in substandard or suboptimal decisions in some cases.
Bad enough when you get a different. I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. Tom, did you say that?
You mentioned that I have some fairly strong language around demand bias. I call it evil. It is evil. It is evil to a business. There is nothing good that comes from a demand bias. There's nothing good that can come from a supply plan bias either, by the way. If we're constantly over-delivering, under-delivering, and over-promising, there's nothing good that's going to come from that either. But a demand bias is evil to a business, and it has nothing but problems attached.
Bob, I'd like to go back to, I'm not going to retract my answer or anything severe like that, but it brought to mind an example where a company that I was working with recently, sourcing a good portion of their product from Asia. And they had approximately that 3-month response time between the lead time at the production plant, the lead time to get to the port, the lead time of transit from the ocean, blah, blah, blah. 3 months gone. So measuring forecast accuracy and bias at that 3-month level gave that company the impetus to say, we have to do something different, because we're in a fast-moving business where consumer tastes are changing very rapidly. And if we can't forecast the business, we have to do, and something along the lines of what Tom was mentioning, make some flexible response in my supply capability. Make some flex response by sourcing in someplace like Central America or Mexico or perhaps even in the States, but with some robotic manufacturing to make some customization at the last minute very feasible. Because I can't predict consumer preferences for certain colors or certain features and things like that with a great deal of confidence. So measuring that can lead to a different supply strategy or different sourcing strategy. And that's where the beauty comes into measuring things. Measure them with an outcome that you desire to get. Measuring should not be just for the sake of measuring.
Yeah, your comment is just so timely right now with all the considerations of supply diversification and risk management and things like that. So it's a great idea to have that kind of consideration. Okay, here's another question. I think I'm going to give this one to Pete. See what you think. It says, how do we understand better where we have inventory, but we don't know why?
Well, I think it's one of the areas that I mentioned, so I'm glad that that question came across. Doing some analysis, basing the analysis on what I would call classic inventory models. So you have inventory models that would say, here's what the safety stock is supposed to be. Here's what my cycle stock inventory is. These are all calculations. These are mathematical calculations. You should know your lead time. You know what your order quantities are. You know what your run quantities are. And you should be able to take through an analysis on a product by product basis and say, here's what my manufacturing lead time is. Here's what my inventory is because of lead time. Here's what my transit time is. Here's what my inventory is because of transit time. Here's my safety stock calculation based on demand variability. That's what my safety stock should be. Here's my pipeline fill quantity. And then that should be the mathematical piece. And you stack that up against your current inventory and you say, what is the rest of it? And if nobody can explain it, then it's inventory that somebody either ordered or made a decision that wasn't based on those, what I would call management and business decisions in terms of what the inventory should consist of. Now, there is a component of inventory that was a small sliver on one of the pages, and it talked about hedging stock. Hedging stock is a legitimate component of inventory. Hedging is a decision that business leaders, managers make to say, how much should I have because of uncertainty of supply? How much should I have because of uncertainty of my supplier performance? That's a business decision, and that's perfectly fine, but we should go in eyes open, and we should make sure that we have decided that's my hedging stock strategy. What we don't want to see is everybody that handles a piece of the decision-making process adding their own hedge with no decision-making and no accountability.
Well, thank you very much for that. Unfortunately, we do have more audience questions, but we are just about out of time. I'm sure that our speakers would only be too happy to answer any of these unanswered questions offline. But in the meantime, we have time for really just one final question. And here it is. It's pretty basic. Let's say an audience member is saying, what is the one thing that I need to do right now? Tom?
Well, I think we're going to kind of go back to the beginning of the presentation. Pete talked about foundation. And if your foundation is weak, your plan will not work. It will not get you the value that you're looking for. And so the first thing I would recommend is you go back to basics. You make sure that your master data and your inventory record accuracy are what we call Class A, meaning better than 95% accurate on a consistent basis. And once you get that done, then you can start really honing in on your planning process.
Pete, what's your insight on that? The one thing needs to happen.
What I would suggest for those participants that jotted down in their notes a key takeaway, go and pursue it and do it in the next few days. It might have been a follow-up to say, find out what my master data accuracy is. Do that in the next few days, or take a step in that direction. Or it might be a takeaway that said, boy, I don't know what our supply strategy exactly is. I don't know where we meet our customer, and maybe I haven't made a decision in terms of a conscious decision that I want to make to stock or make to order. If that's your takeaway, go and pursue it. In a session like this, the value comes from taking a nugget like that or two, and then going and pursuing that. And if we don't do that within the next few days or the next week, that idea will be lost forever. That's that. So I would say take any step in the right direction, because a step in the right direction is going to get you closer and closer to your goal.
What a great presentation this has been, with all the talk, kind of the vague discussions of needs for better planning and agility and all the same. The two of you have given us some real detailed insights into exactly what companies need to do in order to improve their planning process and be truly agile at a time of such unpredictability. I want to draw audience's attention to a plethora of great assets that are available to you from Oliver White. Starting with this ebook on getting the most out of integrated business planning. This is a series of curated articles that is chock full of insights and resources. There is a QR code and a URL that will be provided to you after the session, so you don't have to worry about copying that down. And a series of upcoming courses from Oliver White in several cities over the coming year, including a first ever course in operational excellence, Fix the Factory. So once again, there's some contacts there, and that information will be provided to all webinar attendees. Once again, I want to thank Pete Alley and Tom Stroll for an excellent presentation. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you, audience, for sitting in and for your great questions. Everybody, best of luck and stay well, and see you again. Thank you.
Thanks.